All right, joining us for today, we have the Athletic writers Ollie Kay and Jack Pitt-Brooke. Jack, let's start with you. England 1-0, beating Serbia. They got the job done 3-0. But I don't know. I felt underwhelmed. How did you feel?
Uh, Overall, I probably felt a little bit underwhelmed given that England had started so well in that first half an hour. You got a sense that this was an England team playing with more sort of confidence and more advanced attacking football than we had seen. And then I think over time it kind of got more and more, it became more and more familiar, basically. It
Mm.
became more and more like England games that we've seen in the past, particularly in group stages. I don't think overall it was that different from the 1-0 win at the start of the last Euros against Croatia, where I don't think they played as particularly well. The 2-1 win against Tunisia at the start of the 2018 World Cup. Obviously,
Mm.
everybody left that game on a huge high because of the last minute winner, but England were pretty poor for a lot of that game. So I uh, I don't think they played especially well, but I don't think they played much worse overall than we've seen them do in the past in these types of games.
Mm. Well, Ollie, Jack mentioned something, yeah, which reminded me yesterday. I actually sent a screen grab of the opening stages of the Euros around the WhatsApp group yesterday. England, Croatia, first match of the last Euros, 1-0, almost identical to this in many respects. From the piece you wrote, this feels like, I guess, something that's quite familiar and certain issues that England seem to show in these tournaments as well.
Yeah, I think it has definitely been a common performance that for England over the years, and not just the Southgate years. I mean, I think back to the last World Cup here in Germany, 2006, there was a performance, an opening performance against Paraguay where England scored it very early on, and then were just left clinging on terribly. Really desperate, turgid football, and they certainly weren't. I mean, people can talk about England not being able to keep the ball last night, but they kept the ball a lot better in the second half than they did in some of those performances. I think back to Italy in 2012 and yeah, the ones that Russia in 2016 under Roy Hodgson, even going much further back, sort of Sven-Göran Eriksson years, and the old phrase of first half good, second half not so good. We've just seen that England performance so many times. And it does feel like, I mean, it's particularly, I think, with the opening game of the tournament, or the opening few games of the tournament, it feels like England nearly always go into it um, looking a bit flat. I think the difference last night was that they started. I thought the first half hour was without going overboard. I thought it was really, really decent, and then it just tailed off completely. And they were, look, I wouldn't overstate it. They weren't holding on for dear life, but they were holding on unconvincingly and grateful for the final whistle when it
I
came.
guess
So, yeah.
I guess, Ollie, one of the questions that I had watching at home was, to what extent do you think the chances and possession that Serbia had in the second half, would that have been outside of what Southgate had planned for the game? Like, did you feel like England were under real threat, or was it just kind of hopeful crosses and shots from distance?
Personally, look, I think it was, I think England would have wanted to have them more at arm's length than they did. Certainly for that sort of period from, I don't know, I guess 40 minutes to 70 minutes. That to me is when it felt like Serbia were particularly dangerous, or maybe 40 to 80 minutes. I don't know. I didn't feel going into the final 10 minutes that I do actually feel like England were defending defending their own box pretty well, and it wasn't looking like Serbia would have the magic ingredient to unlock that. But it's, yeah, I guess you do always expect, if you're only leading by one goal, you do expect the opposition to come back into it at some point. But I felt it shouldn't have been to that extent. And I'm not dismissive of Serbia because they've got some really good players. I was surprised by how dominant England appeared to be in that first half hour. But yeah, it's yeah, I don't think Southgate would look at that second half and think, yeah, that was all fine. We had all of that under control. I thought control was severely lacking that second half.
Yeah, Jack. I mean, in fairness, as we've just mentioned, that the performance probably wasn't particularly fireworks, but Jude Bellingham at the end of the match said something, and I thought it was really interesting. He was like, England need to set their own standards and not sort of follow the theme of the tournament. We've already seen Germany start so explosively, and Spain playing so well already. At the end of the day, England got the 3 points. They only need another win, and they'll be, through to the next round of this tournament. Just focus on what you're good at. It doesn't matter if it's absolutely illuminating at this period of the tournament.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why I'm not too down on yesterday's performance, is that I think Southgate has absolutely earned the benefit of the doubt on performances in group stages. Like, Southgate has proven that he is very, very good at navigating his way through the group stage into the serious end of the tournament. And England haven't always shone under Southgate in group stages before, but their record in knockout rounds is very good. They've got to a World Cup semi, a Euros final, a World Cup quarter final. So that's one reason why I'm not too worried. The other reason, which is connected to that, is we've all watched enough tournaments to know that the team that plays the best football in the first week doesn't automatically go on and win it. Like, how every single tournament, there's one or two teams which blows someone away in the group stages, and everyone says, "Oh, how are they not? Of course they're going to win," and then they never do. And it's always teams with a lot more sticking power, whether that's, I don't know, France in 2018 or Portugal in 2016,
Argentina at the World Cup,
or even Argentina in 2022, who I don't think were particularly convincing in the group stages. So no,
I mean, even Greece that won it in 2004. Exactly, do you remember
that? So we should not read too much into who plays the sexiest football in the group stages, I think.
Not many teams or fans like England necessarily, but there is this sort of allure to want to watch England, Ollie. This is a team that definitely attracts a lot of attention for any competition, mainly fundamentally because I think, of the brand that the Premier League exudes, the players there. And I guess if you look at the likes of Bellingham, Kane, Foden to a certain degree, we've got some global stars here, but there is still that kind of like, will they actually win something?
Yeah, the Dallas Cowboys comparison I thought was interesting. I was thinking, I'm sure Dallas Cowboys have won the Super Bowl at least a few times in the last 60 odd years, and they have, but not for a long time. And there's probably that sort of sense of entitlement and sense of I don't know, or perceived arrogance with certain teams that you have. And look, I think that accusation and the sort of arrogance and entitlement could definitely have been applied to the England of perhaps the 2000s. There was that sort of air of, in terms of the media coverage, the sort of everything that went around the England team when they had all the superstars, Beckham, Gerrard, Lampard, Rooney, Owen, etc. I feel like this is quite a humble, hardworking, together. I feel like the culture around this England team, and even, to be honest, people will laugh because nobody agrees with this, I think the media coverage of England over the last decade has become a lot more proportionate and a lot more sensible. I don't think it's, people will always be able to point to one or two things that aren't proportionate, whether it's good or bad, but I feel like that sort of air of perception of entitlement has gone a little from the thing around the England team. I still think I have absolutely no doubt that there are a lot of people who tune in to England and want them to lose. I think particularly our neighbours, and I absolutely totally understand that. But I don't know, when I speak to journalists from other countries, and Germany in particular, that I feel that they're all, unless they're just trying to say this in the hope of appeasing me or placating me, but they all seem to be real Anglophiles in terms of football and culture and maybe not food, but they like the England team and they want England to do well, and they enjoy seeing a decent England team rather than an England team sticking the tournament out, as has happened in the past. So I'm sure if you go on social media, you will see nothing but hatred for England from other countries, and probably after a second half last night, probably a lot of hatred towards England from a lot of the English fans as well. But it's I feel like that's perhaps more Alexi Lalas thinks than the entire world.
Yeah, Jack. I mean, slightly contrary to what Ollie's saying about the press being a bit more just around England. Stuart James put out this piece on The Athletic a couple of years ago now. And, he's talking about England and arrogance, is football really coming home? And he sort of talks about, Luka Modric talking about, certain pundits under writing Croatia when they played England in the World Cup, and then Croatia obviously went on to win that game. Is there a sense sometimes with the media that this team, because it's so equipped, because we are, or England is the home of Premier League football, that there's sort of a rite of passage when it comes to tournaments for this team to do well?
I think the whole "it's coming home" thing is quite interesting, because I think it's clearly from here. I think we all know that "it's coming home" is not meant to be like an arrogant prediction that England are definitely going to win a tournament. But clearly it doesn't travel well, and lots of people hear that in foreign countries and think that this means that the English think they're going to wipe the floor with everyone in Europe. I actually think one of the unusual things about this tournament is that normally going into tournaments we have a big national debate about the true meaning of "it's coming home," which has been sadly missing from the pre-tournament discourse this time around, which makes me think that maybe we've all moved on a little bit, perhaps. But I also think it's worth mentioning that the image, and this kind of ties in with what Ollie was saying, the image that Southgate and these players put out to the media and to the wider world, and I certainly feel like this is picked up in other countries, is, I think, far more humble, and I think far more representative of what you might call the best face of English football than England teams of the past, which I don't think have really shown that at all. And I do think that I don't think this means that, I certainly wouldn't go as far as to say that England are now everyone's second team, because clearly that isn't the case. But I do think that there is quite a lot of admiration for Southgate as a person and for what he represents, which probably would not have been the case with England managers of the past.
Yeah, do you buy that, Ollie? Like, Gareth Southgate's really added something to this team, I guess a humbleness on a global scale, where, we do have, or England do have, these superstars, but actually the way he's managed these players, you look at the situation with Bukayo Saka and, Rashford in the last Euros, and actually kept them on side as a unified force, has allowed us, I guess, the global press to look at this team and think, actually, yeah, they're a good bunch of lads, actually, and actually so is that coach.
I do genuinely believe that. Yeah, and I know people aren't very happy with. Well, people are never very happy with Gareth Southgate, because despite the record, the tournament record under him being so much more positive than it had been since Alf Ramsey, basically. But yeah, I think even people who are pulling their hair out because he has, one player in midfield or one player on the left wing, or they're not happy with his team selections or the way that England ease off in games, etc. I think even those people, his harshest critics, must surely recognise that there are things he has done in terms of the psyche of this England team and the culture around this England team, and that have improved it. It's not just a case of getting a few good players at once. It's, England have had very good players in the past, and have had world-class players in the past, and have never had this real sense of togetherness and unity and sort of sense of purpose that they've had the last few years. I think it's really admirable. I think when people, and when the media in other countries certainly see Southgate getting a lot of stick from the English, I think they think, God, have you guys got short memories? And I also think when you look at it the other way, and when England were struggling last night and performing poorly, I think there was some real condemnation of England's performance by foreign pundits and saying, look, this is not good enough. And I agree with that as well. It wasn't the performance in the second half wasn't good enough. It was good enough to win the game, but it wasn't good enough to sort of send out a serious statement in terms of England's intentions. I think people do recognise what Southgate has done and that this England team of the past few tournaments has been different in a good way to a lot of the England teams of the past.
Yeah, okay, well, let's get a taste from across Europe now. Here's Seb Stafford-Bloor, who is covering Germany for The Athletic at the Euros.
Yeah, the German press haven't actually been that complimentary. Bild spent more time talking about the rendition of Sweet Caroline after the game, so that's probably not a good sign. Kicker, which is the biggest football magazine in the country, they focused really on Jude Bellingham, talked about his performance, really liked his influence, and talked also about the kind of the physicality of England, but not really the quality of the performance. Elf Freunde, who are like a sort of a 442 style magazine, really. They weren't very complimentary. They talked about, they included some quotes from Christoph Kramer, who was working on German television last night, about how angry England make him because of what he was implying is because of how they misuse their talent, and how, to quote him, they take the lead in games and they go into administrative mode. So not hugely impressed so far. And generally there's been a lot of coverage also of kind of the experience that some of the fans had in the city. So not really about the football at all.
I mean, there's never been any sort of love lost between the Germans and English in general when it comes to football anyway. But I guess with Harry Kane now in the Bundesliga, there's got to be some sort of appetite for what he does in these Euros tournaments. And there's a potential of him even facing Germany at some point, Ollie, in the later stages.
Yeah, and is more likely of England finish second in the group. I mean, I think that would be the likely outcome of England finish runners up. Last 16 game against Germany again, which would be fascinating. I think the Germans in particular can probably identify with this England team. They've had Bellingham there, they've got Kane there, they've had Jadon Sancho, who's not in the squad now, but I think there's a good sense of identifying with this generation of English players. But as I said earlier, I do think there is a sort of warmth towards English football from the German football community and from the media and fans. I don't, not necessarily all the time, and I'm sure they absolutely. Well, I know that they find it hilarious that we still bang on about Euro 96 and 1990 World Cup as if England won them, whereas in Germany they're just remembered as yet another German victory. So yeah, it's an interesting one, but I think people will look at this team and just think it's some world-class players, some very good players, a manager who's proved himself to be a good England manager over the last few tournaments, and a more serious, credible England team than the previous decade.
Yeah, Jack, there's a little word there on, the worry that England don't know how to use the talents on the field properly, especially the young players, from that little excerpt there. Is that a fair comment? The Germans known to churn out great young talent, harbour them in their league, and actually here are England again at the world stage, or at a European stage in particular, not quite clicking with this incredible, especially attacking squad anyway.
So yes and no. I don't think Germany have got the best out of their players over the last 10 years. I think they have consistently underperformed really since they won the World Cup in 2014. In terms of England, I think Southgate has done much better than his predecessors in taking advantage of the players available to him. The one question mark I think is over Phil Foden, who, FWA Football of the Year this year, has been unbelievably good for Manchester City. And yeah, I watched him last night on TV and I thought we've not really seen anything like the Manchester City Foden in an England shirt. I know he's scored a few goals in the last World Cup, but he just doesn't look. I don't know if it's to do with confidence or to do with the system or to do with his position in the team, but it's just not quite clicking for him. And I do wonder whether this will be a bigger issue as the tournament goes on, and whether there will eventually be calls to try something else. It kind of be bizarre not to play him, given how good he is, and yet it just doesn't quite seem to work.
Well, of course, Jude Bellingham is the main man in Spanish club football right now for Real Madrid. Has this been a factor to how this England team are viewed in Spain? Well, here's Dermot Corrigan with his take from Madrid.
It's a really interesting one, this, because people in Spain are generally pretty well disposed towards the England national team. They know all the players, they like a lot of the personalities. They see England as like a historic, big team, and every time a tournament comes around, they're mentioned as one of the favourites. Like, over the years, there's been a lot of interest and goodwill towards England with, Beckham, Owen, the golden generation, Lampard, Gerrard, Rooney. Maybe alongside questions too about why they never came good in their potential and won something at international level. It'd be pretty similar now. Lots of people watch the Premier League, Champions League too. And then, of course, Bellingham made such a huge impression at Madrid this year. And a lot of Blancos fans will be cheering for him in the tournament this summer. There will be Madrid fans who would support their own players, going back to even Cristiano Ronaldo in Portugal, maybe even over the Spanish national team, just because of the way things work in Spain, especially at Madrid, that Real Madrid is the be-all and end-all for them. One thing I maybe add is that, and this could be maybe among more analysts and journalists, tactical experts than your match-going fans or your typical guys watching the game on the TV, is that the feeling that England are never tactically the best side at the tournament or the best coached. Just following Twitter last night, Southgate was coming in for a good bit of criticism from people who I'd follow in Spanish language accounts. So there'd be a feeling that they do have a lot of good players, but that they never really come together as a team who are capable of winning the tournament. So maybe goodwill for England, but maybe Spanish pundits or experts would have a bit more respect maybe for Germany or France and see them as more difficult opponents in the latter stages of the tournament.
What can we say about Jude Bellingham? The star coming into this tournament. Also, he scored the goal yesterday, rescued England, some might say. Jack, do you think his arrogance backs up his consistency?
I don't think he's arrogant. I think he plays with a lot of swagger and personality. And we saw that yesterday when he sort of walked straight into Kostic deliberately, and he's always had this kind of amazing maturity on the pitch. Although I think if you talk to people in football, they always, like, managers always use that phrase "good arrogance," don't they? Like, and that's what you want from good players. You want them to be sort of having themselves a bit. I think that's all fine. I mean, I always think the amazing thing about Bellingham is when you listen to him talk after a game, is that he's like a kind of 34-year-old Michael Ballack, and yet he's only 20. And yet while I think it's kind of, I mean, we've seen that a lot this season. Certainly, like when he'll do post-match TV interviews after big Real Madrid Champions League games or whatever. We saw that again last night. Like, his ability to break down and explain the game and articulate how he views it and how he wants it to be viewed, I think it is amazing. But I wrote something the other week about Bellingham and his time in the England 15, 16, 17s. I think he's always been like that. Like, even when he was a 15-year-old at St George's Park, he would wow everyone else in the building with his ability to analyze a game and the way he could present in front of teammates. So I think that is a big part of his uniqueness. But I don't think I don't know whether it kind of counts as arrogance in my mind.
Yeah. He's also got a bit of a naughty streak, I got to say, Ollie. I especially remember when he was at Birmingham City. He definitely got squared up to a few players. But I guess, as Jack would say, that's quite useful, especially a player that wants to dominate the field, that wants to show his presence, and actually doesn't want to be bumped off the ball. Is this something you feel like could be rubbing off on the England players as well, or they needs to rub off on some of the England players? Because we talk about Phil Foden yesterday. Cesc Fabregas says you need this player. He's good, but he also needs to ask for it. He needs to want it in a way that Jude Bellingham wants it. Do you think that kind of energy, that kind of confidence, that arrogance, that fearlessness is rubbing off or can rub off on this England squad?
I think it can. I think it possibly needs to, in terms of one of those sort of few remaining ingredients that England need. You could look at the England team of the last few years and say that they're really good. They do a lot of things very well, but you could also say, are they ruthless enough? Are they nasty enough? Do they, it's that side of things that I think that I look back to the quarterfinal against France in Qatar in 2022, and I felt like that wasn't a question of control. I felt that was almost like a question of personality, mentality, ruthlessness, character, rather than tactics, technique, etc. I think genuinely think that was the difference in France had these, someone like Giroud and Mbappe and Griezmann all had really good games. The midfielders had good games, but they really sort of dug it out through difficult periods in that game. I don't think England have excelled at that. And I think in Bellingham they've got somebody who I just thought, looking at him last night, I mean it was like he was refusing to say no for an answer. It was a sort of that sort of phrase of people or players grabbing the game by the scruff of its neck, and I thought for the first hour he was absolutely doing that. He was just popping up everywhere, doing everything, and doing it really, really well, linking the extra man in midfield, the extra man in attack. So yeah, it's strange when you're looking at players like sort of Harry Kane and Kieran Trippier and John Stones, older players in the team. Some of them have, John Stones has won loads of trophies in his time and with Manchester City, but he will probably be thinking, wow, I'm glad we've got this 20-year-old who's got this personality on the pitch. Declan Rice has got something of that personality as well in a maybe a more understated way. So yeah, I think when we talk about England easing off in games, I think there's a technical part of that. There's a tactical part of that. I think there's also a sort of personality and character aspect to it, and I think having people like Jude Bellingham and having some of his enthusiasm and spirit and character rub off on people is no bad thing.
Yeah, well, I'm so fascinated by this, Jack, as whether England are really as good as they think they are, but surely they've got to feel confident having come to the final of the previous Euros, and obviously losing to Italy, and then the semi-finals of the World Cup with a very similar squad. That momentum or that feeling of we can do something here has to be festering within them.
Yeah, I mean, I think even though Southgate has made a lot of changes, I do think there's still clearly a huge amount of experience in this group. Half the team are players who've been on Southgate with this journey since Russia 2018 World Cup. So that would be Pickford, Walker, Stones, Trippier, Kane, most notably. But even of the younger players who Southgate brought in after the 2018 World Cup, this is their third tournament. Declan Rice, Bellingham, Saka. These are guys who all came into the England team around the last Euros, the kind of COVID Euros, and so they've now got the experience. And I do think that you can kind of see that a little bit in the way how confident Rice was yesterday, how confident Bellingham was. I thought Saka was brilliant for the first half. That we had the left back on absolute toast, and which is great because I think there have been question marks coming into the Euros whether Saka was a little bit kind of jaded or burnt out from a pretty exhausting season with Arsenal. So I do think that England have a really nice mix of youth and experience. He's not been too loyal. I know that in the past Southgate has been criticised for being too loyal to those guys who were with him since Russia, but you certainly couldn't say that now, given there's no Maguire, no Henderson, no Sterling, no Rashford. And so, yeah, I feel like the balance in kind of age and experience feels pretty good right now. I think he's probably been like maybe a little bit risky in taking one or two younger players and leaving one or two more experienced players behind. I think what a lot of people are really interested in seeing is how some of these players who are completely new to this level of football, by which I really mean Palmer and Gordon in attacking positions, but I think those and Bowen as well. I think those three will be the most important. How ready they are just to be thrown in and make a difference and score a goal, because that's one of the big outstanding questions that we've got going into this.
I think from the outside, it's hard to work out what the hierarchy will be amongst those. Who will be the go-to player? As a Bowen, Palmer, Gordon, etc. That they're probably all seem to have started on a similar footing going into this squad, and I think it will be not just a sort of horses for courses situation, but it will probably reflect a lot of what we're not seeing in training. So for Bowen to come on, I think is consistent with the suggestion he's been buzzing and very impressive, sort of physically and otherwise in training. I thought Eze was going to come on at one point, and I was fascinated to see that because he's probably not had as much attention as Palmer and Gordon in the build up. But yeah, I was quite up for that. I felt like his skill set could have eased the situation because he's despite not having the profile of the others, he's also very, very good.
I guess this kind of brings us back to your point about Foden, Jack. Is he the kind of manager, Southgate, with the minerals to tweak with these dynamic players and get the best out of them? I guess in a way that Pep Guardiola has managed to do, and I guess a lot of other managers tend to do when they've got such talent at their disposal.
Yeah, I think so. I think he's got. You just have to. I think you just have to judge him on his record so far. Like he's got, he's got a huge amount out of Kane, Sterling, Rashford, Henderson. All sorts players who are hugely significant players at club level, have had fantastic club careers, and Southgate has got them to play really well. So I don't doubt that Southgate. I don't doubt that Southgate can get the best out of Foden. I think really what I think the issue is playing for Man City so different from playing for England that Foden's football kind of can't quite click into place. I think that's the issue. I think City are so synchronized in everything they do, and they're so incredibly well coached, and everybody knows where everyone's going to be at any given moment. And you just can't replicate that in international football because you don't have the amount of time working together. And so that's why I think when people say Southgate needs to give Foden freedom, I think that's coming at the issue from like completely the wrong direction. I think the point is that at City, Foden doesn't really have freedom. Like Foden is like, it's so positional and everybody knows exactly where they're meant to be. And then he comes to England where it has to be a little bit more off the cuff. And suddenly he doesn't have it doesn't kind of fit quite as well for him. So I think it's more of a kind of technical issue rather than a sort of personality level issue with Foden. That's just my theory, because I know that on BBC last night, Fabregas said that in fact it was a personality thing and that Foden needs to be a bit more demanding and more confident.
That's what I thought. So
maybe he's Fabregas knows more about this than I do, but that's just that's just my view.
Yeah, but Ollie, is this just a Gareth Southgate thing? Can we not look a bit sort of broader here? I mean, look, the French seem to find a way of doing it and cramming all those insane players on the pitch and getting something out of them. I guess you can now see an emerging style with the German setup, the Spanish in a very similar way. Is it more to do with this idea of what is that English way of playing football right now, especially in these tournaments, so we can see the true freedom that these players have to offer?
Well, if you look at Spain's and Germany's performances over the last few tournaments, I think they'll be looking with envy at what England have done at those tournaments and the way that Southgate has found a system that works. And it's probably most similar in approach to the Didier Deschamps approach with France. He doesn't just put all the most exotic or most talented players on the pitch and sort of say, here you go. He's been criticised quite a lot of the time. Go back to particularly during 2018 World Cup, he was getting slaughtered by the French media and French public and ex-players and so on for the way they were playing. It was said to be too cautious and we'll never win it and anything with this guy. He's had his chance. And I think Southgate's approach is quite similar. He sort of blocks out the noise and he has a system and he gets players to try to work within that system. I think, as Jack was saying, if you look at England's players over the last few years, most of them have performed as well for the national team as they have for their clubs, and that's been so rare within the history of the England team. Particularly, you go back to that golden generation team who were playing under proven winners, serial winners like Sven-Göran Eriksson and Fabio Capello. So I think people really underestimate that when they're talking about what you need in international management. I think Southgate has shown a flair for actually getting the best out of most of these players. And I think the two exceptions are, as we said, Phil Foden and Trent Alexander-Arnold, who he's never really seemed to understand as a footballer, and never really played him in his favorite or previously favorite position as right back, but now wants to sort of build a midfield around him, and that's fascinating. I thought it worked okay for the first half hour last night. I thought, well, yeah. I don't think people will be up in arms about Alexander-Arnold in midfield. And then he gave a ball away late in the first half. There was something similar early in the second, and then towards the end, you thought, well, it hasn't really worked. He hasn't really been the missing link that you want him to be in that position. But I think Southgate is looking at his alternatives in that situation, looking at his options in that area of the pitch, and thinking, well, he can be our best option. And it's not really entirely clear whether he can be. I think the jury's still out. I think the jury's still out on not on Foden's ability at all, but about whether England can succeed with two of their best players in the team, or whether it needs a sort of a bit more horses for courses approach, and square pegs, square holes, etc. Should I get another couple of cliches in there? And not putting all your eggs in. No, it's
don't do it. Don't do it.
No. Not going to go for hat trick. So I do think it's really fascinating, and I think it's not just as simple as doing whatever the public want him to do and whatever the media want him to do. He's seeing it every day in training. He's got more idea about these players than we do. We could all have our preferences and think, well, I prefer that player in midfield. I prefer that player on the left wing. But I think Southgate has genuinely earned the benefit of the doubt in these situations, and people shouldn't be sort of yelling and screaming that such and such a thing doesn't work. And God, I was just loads and loads of cliches are coming to mind. It's terrible, but it's yeah. I would go with roughly the same 11 against Denmark and see if it goes. I think generally with tournaments, unless it's been disastrous in the first game, you generally give it 2 games before deciding to do anything drastic. And I don't think there's any need to do anything drastic. I think last night was a underwhelming win in a way, but it wasn't a disastrous one.
Jack, I see you're trying to get in.
No, I was just agreeing.
All right. Well, this is the thing before we
There's
wrap
no fun
up.
in that.
There's no. Don't agree. I want more. But no, real talk. Let's say this is Southgate's, last stand as an England manager, and I'd be interested to get both your views on this. Start with you, Jack. Do you think he's that sort of monocle as a top manager based on what he's achieved with this England squad?
I think he is already the most significant English manager of the modern era, as in post Ramsey. The most significant England manager post Ramsey. What he's done for English football is huge. Is he a top manager in the sense that Pep Guardiola or Carlo Ancelotti are top managers? Well, international football and club football are just very different. I don't think it's necessarily helpful to compare the two. I don't know to what extent you can read across what Southgate's done with England with what people have done at the top of club football, because I think so much of a big part of what Southgate has done in the England job is stuff other than training and tactics and putting out the right team. It's to do with setting the right message. It's to do with taking on this broader role that he's built for himself as the kind of spokesman for the soul of the national game. And it's detoxifying. That's the opposite of what he's done. Detoxifying. Sorry.
Maybe that's the final chapter. The retoxification.
The retoxification.
Retoxifying will be what the next bloke does after ahead of the 2026 World Cup. But detoxifying this England team, both in the sense of the public perception of the English team, but also in the sense of, do the players enjoy playing for them? The English players love playing for England. They absolutely love it. And that I think is a huge legacy, even aside from the fact that the team has performed much better than they had done in the last 20 years and routinely done well in tournaments. So yeah, I'd say even if they fail at this Euros, I don't think they will, but even if they do fail, I think he's had a huge legacy, but that isn't the same as saying he's a kind of Guardiola, Mourinho, Ancelotti level manager, I think.
Yeah. In that, guys, though, I mean, Ollie, I mean, Mancini won domestically and also won in Europe as well. Could Gareth Southgate be put in that category in terms of top manager?
You know, I don't think that. I think England have finally had the right type of manager in Southgate. It's not necessarily the perfect manager for every moment, but I think, he, as Jack said, he's been a really, really good England manager. Whether that makes him a really good manager, I'm in terms of the club game, the entire football landscape, I'm not sure. I mean, there was talk of Manchester United and Manchester United being interested in him, which I know that there is real admiration from the Ineos guys at Man United for Southgate, and I find that fascinating because my first thought is no, that wouldn't work at all in terms of the type of manager he is and the sort of day-to-day challenge of managing Manchester United as opposed to the sort of almost presidential role that you have as manager of England. So yeah, it would be. I mean, if this is his last tournament with England, what job would he get next? What would it be? You know, Joachim Löw hasn't exactly been inundated with top clubs since a very, very good tenure as Germany manager. I think people, you know, I think that shows that it's probably a different skill set that is needed, and I think Southgate has done really, really well without being the absolute sort of unicorn manager that everyone wants. That's this person who's going to detoxify the England team and win something. He's come pretty close to it.
Okay, well, let's end it there, gents. Ollie, Jack, thanks so much for your time. And don't forget to rate and review the podcast. We've also got lots of Euro action on the Totally Football Show and the Daily Briefing to keep you We've also got lots of Euro action with the Totally Football Show and the Daily Briefing as well to keep your palates wetted over this Euros period as well. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.